for a very long time. So I'm excited to speak about this Talanoa Dialogue because it's quite an unusual process in the context of the climate talks, and you will hear more about this very soon. And these beautiful first days of spring is probably a good.
Okay, so I'll hand over to Nenad.
So hello, I'm with Croatian Permaculture Association, and in ECOLISE I'm a council member, and I'm calling in from Zagreb, Croatia. Over to Cristiano.
Thank you, Nenad. I'm from Transition Italy, the National Hardwood Transition Movement here in Italy. I'm calling from a place near Bologna. Here is summer already. So it's not spring anymore. It's very hot. It's getting very hot very quickly. And I'm very happy and very curious about this seminar. And I'll pass to Fran.
Hi everyone, I'm Fran. I'm the Communications Manager for Gen Europe, the European Eco-Village Network. And yeah, we're really curious about this process and how we can kind of improve our advocacy message and bring our members into kind of more European advocacy. So this is going to be really interesting. I'm doing well. I'm in Spain and it's beautiful. Summer here as well. It skipped spring. And today we are preparing for the fiestas of our community. So lots of people rushing around, peeling potatoes and preparing spaces for musicians and everything. So it will be a really lovely weekend. But before that, I'm very intrigued to be in this webinar. And I pass on to Peter.
Unmute, yeah. So yeah, same weather here. The turn from winter, we still have some ice, and then suddenly it's summer now. It's quite amazing. And I was going to complete the lumber work because I'm also running a farm, and all the machines broke yesterday, and I thought it was something wrong, and I tested it and it worked. So that made me quite happy. Yeah, we will have a beautiful weekend. Looking really forward to that. David.
Good morning, everybody. I'm calling in from Edinburgh in Scotland, representing the Scottish Community Climate Action Network. And I'm glad to say that I'm looking forward very much this weekend to be going to Dunbar on the coast, about 30 miles away, where we will be having an informal gathering of Transition Scotland Network, which was recognised this last autumn as a national hub. And we will be a small number, but hopefully it will help us set out what we're going to be doing this year. And this is why I've joined the conversation this morning, to see if we can learn anything from European friends. I pass to, let's have a see, to Anna. I have to unmute.
Still no sound.
Anna, your microphone is not working. I wonder if you can try again.
I will try like that. You are listening me now? Yes. Okay. I'm Anna. I'm from Lisbon, from Portugal. I'm working in the Center for Ecology and Environmental Changes. And I work a lot with the strategies and plans of adaptation for climate change at local level. And my background is anthropology, and I'm working with stakeholders engagement and promoting a sort of workshops with stakeholders, where I use scenario workshops, and I work a lot also with narratives. So I'm very fun to know some techniques from this Talanoa method or technique, and to be more effective working with the engagement of stakeholders. So I pass for, let me see, Jeff from Sweden.
Jeff, can you hear us? We cannot hear you.
Pass to someone else for now.
We can hear you now.
He has unmuted.
Can you hear me? Hello. Oh.
We can hear you, Jeff. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, you can hear me. Okay, sorry. I was still trying to solve this. Multitasking, trying to solve the camera. I'll forget it for now, so I can fully be present. Hi, folks. I'm representing Permaculture Sweden. I'm here because I think this dialogue process has a lot of potential. It would be interesting to see how it could be used more in our network, not just here in Sweden, but in other things I'm involved in. So thank you for this invitation. Looking forward to it. Yes, I pass it on to, let's see.
Susie?
Susie.
Susie, yes.
From, yes, sunny Ireland, which we're probably all kind of weeping with relief at the sun here after a winter that just wouldn't go away. So yeah, straight from winter, no spring, straight to summer. It's amazing. No, I'm in my greenhouse. I brought my computer down here because it would be unbearable to be in an office on a day like today. I wouldn't have come if I couldn't bring it with me. So as long as it doesn't run out of juice, I'm here. And I suppose I'm representing Permaculture Network of Ireland and Transition Towns. I'm involved in here too. And we're the host of the European Permaculture Convergence this year in August, and I'm coordinator of that. So hope to see some of you in person there. And when I heard about this dialogue during the climate last COP, I didn't fully understand at all what it was, but my heart sang at the notion of it. So now I'm really happy to learn what it actually is, but my heart intelligence said that. I want to know more about that. So that's me. Thank you. And I'll pass to Louise. Louise.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
We can see you too.
Okay, great. Yes, I'm Louise from Denmark, and I'm the chairman of the EcoVillage network in Denmark, and also for the co-housing movement. And I was just curious to go into this meeting today to see some faces, what is happening. I'm very interested in ECOLISE activities, but has not been involved in anything so far. And right now I'm on my job, so I can only be here for a short time, because I should do other stuff right now. And here the sun is shining outside, so it's a little bit boring to be at work. But that's enough for me, I think. Are we all around?
No, I think, is that Yvette who just joined? If you'd want to introduce yourself.
Somebody joined on the phone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, so I'm the person calling on the phone. My name is Yvette Jakbasu. I'm the Advocacy Director of GEN International. I'm so sorry not to be able to join the webinar with my computer, but I'm on the move, so I kept losing the connection. I'm really excited to listen to the discussion today, and yes, to learn more about the Talanoa Dialogue. Jen will actually be participating in the dialogue in Bonn in May this year. So yeah, just looking forward to see how we can collaborate and to learn from you guys. So very nice to meet everybody. And sorry not to see your faces.
Thank you so much, Yvette. very glad to have you here, given that you'll be at Bonn and Sebastian will be there too. Unfortunately, I won't. But now I'd like to hand over to Sebastian and take us through what is the Talanoa Dialogue and why it's important for us to engage as communities in this dialogue and how we can actually use this approach ourselves. Seb, do you have a presentation that you would like to share or share screen?
Yeah, let me try to see if that works. I think here. Can you see it now? Yes, okay, excellent. And please let me know initially from France, so if a French accent comes too strongly across, just to make some universal SOS sign. I will try to repeat or reword what I've just said. So maybe to start with just a couple of background slides on where the international climate negotiations are at right now. In Paris, there were a couple of things that were celebrated in 2015. It was a very strong relief for many because it was the first time that we had universal support for a climate agreement since a very long time. Also because the Paris Agreement enshrined some very important climate objectives, the 2 degrees target that I guess you have heard about, and also the importance of focusing on 1.5 degree as the maximum tolerable increase of temperatures that actually government should aim at. And this one, this slide, for instance, just a graph from what we'll hear a lot more later during this year on the differences between tolerating temperatures to increase above 1.5 degrees or above 2 degrees, and what are the sort of impacts that communities are going to feel in many regions of the world and through a lot of various interactions. And so there was this great sense of achievement in Paris that at least those 2 targets, keeping temperatures well below 2 degrees and aiming at actually limiting increase of temperature below 1.5 above pre-industrial temperatures, was something that a lot of civil society and vulnerable states were hoping to see. So this was a success in Paris in 2015. But now the big challenge that we have is that we have this enormous gap between this overall objective, the sort of vision that governments have adopted, and then what individual actions by governments, even if fully realized, would mean. And we don't have to delve into this graph. There are a lot of different ways of looking at this, but basically, even in the context where all of the northern countries will fully support financially, as they committed to do for many, many years, the actions by developing states. And even if all of northern and southern governments were to fully implement all their climate policies as they promised in Paris, we'll still be very, very far from the 2 degrees objectives. The temperatures, I don't know if you can see my mouse moving there, but the temperature is, you can? Yeah, okay, excellent. The temperatures are still, even based on these projected actions by states, will still increase way above what government agrees and civil society and scientists should be the objective. So the challenge right now is both to make sure that governments implement all their promises, but even try to look at additional opportunities for governments and for civil society and for every actors to add to what's already being planned. And there is an important scientific process going on this year. The IPCC is working on its report focusing on what are the implications for society of increase of temperatures above 1.5 degree. We'll have an important report addressing this in October, but what we know is that the scientists are going to emphasize the fact that 1.5 degrees of warming is really an important objective, and we should not aim higher. And if we are serious, the international community and all of the actors engaged in this, in trying to keep temperatures below this 1.5 degree objective, then we really have just a few years to galvanize and mobilize action. And so that's a very challenging context, because we know that there is this gap existing if all of the policies are implemented. But what we also know is that some governments, and you can think about the US, but also a lot of other governments, are not even planning on implementing what they had promised in Paris. So hence the challenge. And in Paris, because it was recognized that there was this gap between the collective ambition and then the individual ambition of states, there was an objective to organize a dialogue in 2018 to try to have a conversation about this situation, this gap between the vision and the actions, and to try to leverage additional, commitments or actions that could just help increase the ambition of mitigation action, reduction of emissions. And so there is this new process that's called the facilitative dialogue with two formal objectives. The first one is to take stock of collective progress. What kind of progress have we made towards those temperature objectives? And the second one is to also help governments inform the preparation of their next climate commitments. In 2015, just before the Paris Climate Conference, governments laid out 10 to 15 years climate plans, but with the objective of reviewing those climate commitments every 5 years, both in terms of hopefully upgrading the numbers that they already have committed. So we hope that many states that have, for instance, target for 2025 will increase the ambition of their emissions reduction, but also to look at the following 5 years per year. And the objective is to have, with the Paris Agreement, this step by step, every 5 years, new climate commitments made by all countries. And so the objective of a facilitative dialogue organized this year is to help also governments start to think about what they could be committing to when they prepare in the next couple of years their next climate commitment. This was the setup after Paris and how the sort of general context. Now, one very interesting dimension is that the UN Climate Conference last year was presided by Fiji. And so the Fijian thought that this was critical to the perspective of small island states, this vision of the importance of increasing climate ambition. And they were really thinking hard, how could they bring, with the limited capacity that they have, some additional momentum? And one of the proposals that they put forward was to avoid having this typical UN-centric process where facilitated dialogue is many states just repeating how great they are doing and how others should be doing more, but really take a different approach, something that's based on a Pacific Island tradition. And so this is what is more reflected in this first picture. Their objective of the Fijian presidency of the climate process was, instead of having a UN typical process, to focus on this Talanoa tradition that they have. I'm not obviously from the Pacific Islands, so what I've been told about the Talanoa tradition is that this is a way of sorting out differences in opinions and building consensus among the community, not by negotiating based on positions that each of the actors have, but on relying more on sharing ideas and experiences in a very inclusive, transparent, and participatory manner. And the objective is, by sharing those stories and avoiding naming and blaming and shaming and finger pointing, but really rather trying to extract the lessons learned from past experiences, the participant in a conversation can come to a common vision and agreement for what should be the next step. So that's very different from what we traditionally have at the UN in the climate context. And it applies in two different levels. First, it means that states will be asked to try to have this more positive vision on how can they achieve these objectives that they have agreed to and signed up for at the Paris Climate Conference. And also, second, because of this inclusive and participatory dimension of this Talanoa tradition, the objective is also not to make it a state-centric process, but really open it to a much broader diversity of voices. So you can see a short example. I think the Fijian ran a couple of models to highlight how this will work at the COP. So the first picture is an example of a Talanoa meeting that was hosted during the Bonn Climate Conference. And that's very different from what we have otherwise. That's the second picture, where civil society is just at the back of the room, where you will need literally goggles in order to be able to see what's projected on the screen so far, 100 meters in front of you. So that's a very different context. And it's very interesting because it's the first time that we have such a discussion there. Now, how the process is going to look like, I will go a little bit into this now. First, I wanted to also highlight that the Fijians have thought about this as a very inclusive approach, both in terms of the process, the fact that civil society can participate fully. I will come back to exactly what are the opportunities, but also in terms of questions, trying to avoid thinking only about very technical questions that at the end of the day, only diplomats can answer, or climate scientists, but really thinking about a more visionary conversation so that maybe there is a stronger sense of collective purpose. And so the structure of the dialogue now is focused on 3 questions that are extremely general and really relate to what the Paris Agreement was about actually. Question of those 3 questions are, where are we now in terms of climate action? Where do we want to go? So it has a lot to do with this 1.5 degree and the importance of really seeking to decarbonize the entire economy as rapidly as possible. And how do we get there? The great thing with those questions is that they aren't centered only on questions of metrics and how much greenhouse gases in various economic sectors, but they can allow a much broader narrative also to be channeled through this discussion. We'll come back to this afterwards. But in terms of the process, the Fijian presidency has laid out a stage process with basically 4 stages. There is a preparatory phase that runs through 3 different steps. The first one was up to the beginning of April. Written inputs could be submitted to an online portal where basically a governmental input would be exactly at the same level than input provided by other stakeholders. And this is a transparent portal, so as long as you're not denouncing actions by others, which is something that Fiji has highlighted as being against the Talanoa tradition, your input will just be made available to the public. The second stage is now that the climate negotiation will start again in a couple of weeks in Bonn. And so there will be a report produced by Fiji to try to just provide a bit of a synthesis of all those inputs. And then one day during the climate negotiations dedicated to roundtables where diplomats and a few civil society representatives can just sit at the same table and address first this where are we now question, then where do we want to go, and then how do we get there. And then between May and October, that's the second stage for just input by anyone interested. And there are different ways of channeling this input. I'll come back to that in the next slide. And then finally, in December, during the annual climate conference in Bonn, there will be a follow-up based on ministerial participation, where Fiji is hoping that all of these input provided before can be channeled into some kind of decisions that decision makers will make. And in addition to that, there is a couple of things happening outside in parallel to this process. So first we have, the Fijians have invited national, regional, global thematic dialogues. So anyone can organize Talanoa dialogues at their own level in order to contribute back. And because you have this opportunity to provide written input, one way of doing it is just organizing an event at the national level or internationally focused on one specific aspect, and then have a submission that can be fed into the formal process, the blue process here. And in addition to this, it's important to keep in mind there are 2 big things that will happen at the end of the year in terms of climate governance. The first one is the Global Climate Action Summit in California. It's a summit where you will have local governments, businesses, and to some extent some civil society also highlighting what they already are doing and could be doing besides what national governments are planning. So this will have quite some impact. And then we'll have this intergovernmental panel on climate change reports coming up in October, focusing on these temperature objectives and the consequences and opportunities around those. Now, the blue phase on this slide is the one that's very politically locked somehow. That's where the UN process takes over again. But all of those preliminary steps are the one where process is going to be a lot more inclusive. And there will be opportunity for civil society and governments alike just to provide input. And so focusing on those 3, first you have this opportunity to provide written submissions. There are a few recommendations on the webpage of the Talanoa Dialogue. It's a talanoadialogue.com, I believe. We'll make sure to have a final slide just with a link afterwards. But there is a bit of guidance, but the main guidance is trying to be concise, trying to really address specifically one or the three of the questions to make it very clear what kind of questions we're trying to answer. And then being as actionable as possible in terms of input and trying to build, if possible, from collective experiences. And this can be submitted all the way up to October 29th. And there is some discussion whether the platform is going to remain open afterwards. Okay. I was trying to read the messages on the group, sorry, but things is not good. Okay, back to this. Sorry, I'll leave the chat for now. Mera, can you interrupt me? There is something on the chat, maybe.
Sorry, yeah, no, it wasn't. It was just sharing the website for the Talanoa Dialogue, Nanad. Thanks for that. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, thanks a lot for that. I should have had it there. So thank you for this. In addition, something that is happening in May, and we've just heard about it, there is these Talanoa Dialogues happening during the climate negotiations. So those are going to be roundtable. I don't go in detail about the specifics of this, but it's another moment for governments and civil society to interact. And one of you is going to be there. We have also some of our colleagues. It will be an interesting opportunity to see whether this really works in practice and governments somehow feel comfortable leaving these all UN ways of dealing with conversations. And third, and that's something that's very important, is invitation for anyone to provide, to organize or participate to other kinds of Talanoa dialogues during the year. There are some dialogues that are organized at the regional level. I think Mera will probably have more information on this. There is, for instance, one organized next week by the European Economic Social Committee with the European Committee of the Regions. And there are also other regional dialogues organized in Africa and I think Southeast Asia, for instance. But those are the ones that are still very kind of governmental managed in a way, very institutionalized. But you can also do your own Talanoa dialogue. And we hope to do, for instance, a dialogue focusing on human rights and climate ambition later during the year. The critical point, I would say, is both to try to use this methodology that the Fijians have been trying to put forward, because it's an opportunity for all of us to learn from this cultural tradition of trying to promote consensus, and specifically then to link back to the UN process. Because the questions are so broad, where are we now, where do we want to go, and how do we get there? You can just write a 4-page summary report from whatever event you organized, and just submit it through the portal, and then it's going to be there. It might be picked up when the states are trying to harvest all of the inputs provided. Mera, do you want to say a few words about the European event before I move forward?
Yeah, sure. So the event on the 23rd is one of the reasons we wanted to host a seminar before this webinar before it, because we want to target that as an opportunity where the European Economic and Social Committee are launching a European dialogue for non-state actors. And that's where we come in. So it's really focusing on what we are doing on the ground and what other municipalities, other local initiatives are doing on the ground, and how we can feed that back into the European process. So they're really providing us with a platform. They're really shaping it as a Talanoa dialogue, as Seb explained. So they're going to have various circles looking at all these different 3 questions, and then feeding that back into, well, because these are European institutions, they'll be feeding it back into other European institutions, the Commission and the Parliament. And there will be wide participation from the European Commission and the Parliament. And I will be presenting during one of the circles, which is to talk about how we can enable action on the ground and what frameworks are needed to enable action on the ground. So if you have other questions, I'd be happy to talk about it later. But we'd also like for you to tweet out some of the things that Iva had shared with the invitation to this webinar on the 23rd, Monday, if possible. Go ahead, Seb, thanks.
Few more slides. So this is what's novel in this process is that it's still a process related, the Talanoa Dialogue is still related to the climate negotiations very clearly, but it enables not just what's here as party inputs, the government inputs, but also it provides an opportunity for what's called the Global Climate Action Agenda. So all of the businesses and local governments already contributing and trying to report their own action, and for any civil society input. And this wide range of input is very unusual in this type of UN process. And I will have a couple of slides highlighting the sort of messages that we try to promote with our network. It's to first reframe where do we want to go in the context of social dimensions, determining the required level of climate ambition. So highlighting that the importance of preventing discrimination against women and promoting gender equality, guaranteeing food security, respecting and fulfilling human rights, guaranteeing intergenerational equity and indigenous people's rights. All these can help us understand exactly the level of ambition. And actually, if we look at how do we get there, also, public participation and communities empowerment, both in terms of actions on the ground, but participation in decision-making in regional and national policies related to climate change. Just transition and making sure that workers in, for instance, fossil fuel-related industries are not the one actually losing from this transition. Strengthening indigenous people's rights and particularly land rights over forests, for instance, and promoting long tenure rights of farmer communities and promoting gender equality. All of those are actually leverages that governments can use to actually promote more rapid transition and stronger climate action. And at the moment, that's not the way this is perceived. When we speak in the international climate governance context about the importance of human rights, the first kind of association that decision makers have is that human rights is going to add additional procedures, and hence it's going to slow down decision-making process. It's going to increase the sort of amount of dispute on the ground. If you want to build a dam, you will have to consult even more people, and it's just going to be more complicated. And what we're trying to really tell here as a story is that actually all of those very important social principles are great leverages for governments. An additional point that can be made is also that national governments face at least face some challenges in trying to see how they can decarbonize their economy faster. And that's why the commitments that they have made are not in line with the visions that they have for the temperature increase. And if we can make a strong case that actually by relying more on communities, we can really do that a lot faster. Not everything has to be decided at the national level, but a lot must come from the national level in terms of climate policies, but a lot can also come bottom up. You can get a lot more ambitious national plans. So those are messages that really, because it's such an inclusive process, we have a unique opportunity to make in the context of the climate negotiations. And that's my final slide, I believe. One important point for me is really how this Talanoa Dialogue works at two different levels. First, has an impact on the UN process and how, for instance, governmental decision makers really conceptualize climate ambition and climate policies. But also it's an opportunity for us through this Talanoa methodology to use the national regional events to have a better dialogue with decision makers closest to us, or even within our networks, trying to use the Talanoa methodologies to have maybe more inclusive discussion that we might have had, and also an opportunity for us to really then try to go through this exercise of putting together in a 2 or 4 or 6 page long document, something very short, exactly what do we mean in terms of our own contribution and our own vision for climate ambition. So it's a good challenge that can serve afterwards way beyond 2018. And what we've noticed in our own case is that actually, when we try to explain it, it does take a bit of work to be able to really put this in a document that as convincing as possible to a broader audience. Just to note, finally, there are 2 technical notes that I can mention, and you find the download link here. One is by a group called Friends of Talanoa, which is a very broad group of civil society organizations and think tanks on how to provide input to the Talanoa Dialogue for civil society. And another one that we produce is specifically on these right-based dimensions to climate action and how to feed those into the Talanoa Dialogue. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Seb. There's so much to take in there. But I think what you highlight, which is very relevant for us, is not only just the fact about how to input into these processes and how to influence, the EU's submission, in a way, what they would submit to the UN, because there's a process for that as well, but how we can use this process internally. And I think that's what's most intriguing and interesting for me. I'm sure others will speak to this, but within communities, there are different types of processes in place which resonate with the Talanoa Dialogue and how people come together, make decisions, and how to take things forward, or how to take their vision forward. But I think in terms of how we engage with policy as various networks, this gives us a good tool and methodology to have that engagement if we do want to influence what the EU is going to say about this, and how to raise the ambition of the EU, where we're included as a part of the solutions. So that was great. Thank you so much. I see that. Oh, okay. So David is saying if you could repeat the links to the notes. We'll send them around as well, I think. We'll have an email where we'll send this video link and also the links shared, and other useful information that we could share with you. But I'd like to now open kind of the floor, so to speak, for any questions or comments or reflections people might have. And we can maybe create our own Talanoa Dialogue here. Jeff, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Seb. That was very informative. It's the first time I've actually participated in something that could help with the climate negotiations. I'm curious about the actual methodology. I mean, it reminds me, some parts of it remind me about the scenario planning, but there, for instance, when I've used scenario planning, I've been able to get the step-by-step methodology from like the Forest Initiative and been able to follow and implement it. Is there something such for the Talanoa Dialogues? I mean, I understand that right now it's specific to the climate negotiations, but if we want to, as Mira and others have said, use it in our networks, is there a step-by-step methodology that you can point us to that we can read?
So do you want to answer each question as it comes, or do you want to take a few questions, Sam?
I'm so sorry, I'm just having problems with the sound now. I can't hear the...
Oh.
Really sorry for that, Jeff.
That's okay.
Can you try
should I
again?
repeat it? Should I type it?
You can repeat it.
Okay, just really quickly then, to summarize what I said. Is there a step-by-step methodology that you can point us to that will guide us in how to actually, say, implement a Talanoa Dialogue process? Seb, I typed it in the question.
Okay, I think it's back now. Sorry about that. Really, I don't know what happened just now. So what I would do is, there's been several attempts by the Fijian presidency to try to better explain this Talanoa methodology. There is a short video introduction, and I think we're working on another one before the climate negotiations in 10 days to be able to better explain how this works. So I'll go back to this and try to share the link so that Mera can include it in the notes. And it's probably something that we'll have. I think there is something right now available, and there will be a little bit more in just 2 weeks' time. And to be frank, when they told us this was going to be a Talanoa Dialogue in January, no one had any idea what that meant. So that's a learning process. But the good thing is that, yeah, still many months this year.
Thank you. Yeah, also, yeah, I don't think they have a formalized written down methodology as such, because it's something that's very unique to the Pacific communities and something that it just comes about. And so it's a tradition more than anything else. That's why they don't have kind of a step-by-step written down. But what they did have, and what they repeat often, because on the 18th of this month, they also had a webinar that I think Yvette attended. So I'll let Yvette speak to that in a minute. But they also, again, repeated the ground rules or the principles to organize a Talanoa dialogue, and the principles on which they would accept or reject submissions that are sent to them. So the whole point is to have a very inclusive and positive, constructive dialogue, and not to criticize others and not to blame others, but really to be as constructive and concise as possible in answering those questions that they've put forward. But I guess you could do a Talanoa dialogue around any questions. Anyone else? Peter, please go ahead.
We've been working in Sweden a bit with the EcoSite and the Right to Nature campaign, and that concerns particularly the Pacific Islands. But it's in legal matters, I understand it's more a question of the Hague Commission, if one could include laws to protect nature that actually are parallel to the laws that are supposed to protect nature in wartime. But could you speak something about if there is a connection between those campaigns, and or if the Right to Nature campaign is in some way included in the Talanoa?
Actually, that's a great question, because that's exactly the type of connections that will not be made typically. I think everyone thinks about climate action as really just relating to transport and energy policy, and has a very technical view of that. And one of the great inputs will be actually to make sure that there are a few groups that feed in this sort of framework vision on how do you reframe your laws and your legislative relation to nature, and how that helps actually get us to more climate ambition. And that question, that theme, like really directly talk to how do we get there. One of the responses, well, we just strengthen this legal recognition and make sure we are not only focused on our own little societies. So I don't think it will come up unless other actors take it forward. I don't know if that's already a plan of groups working on the right to nature, but I think the opportunity is totally there. And if it's done well, it should be reflected in some report at the end. And it will really help also in the broader context of the climate talks to actually always rethink a little bit what additional leverage there are for governments to be more proactive in reducing emissions.
Thank you. Anyone else? And yeah, this is something that I want to highlight as well. Because we deal with so many different types of communities working on so many different aspects, not just dealing with the climate impacts on nature, but also how as a society we deal with the interconnected systems of oppression that have been created. We also, deal with how to get out of a system that's extractive, get out of a system that's just focused on money, get out of a system that exploits people. So these are some of the questions that we as communities have dealt with, and it's something that we could actually provide as an answer, as a broader answer and a broader frame to some of these questions, because climate change or the climate crisis isn't just about the impacts of rising emissions. It has a multiplier effect on everything else. It has a multiplier effect on how we deal with poverty, how we deal with inequality, how we deal with racism. Everything is connected. So these are the questions that we need to be also thinking about and bringing into our submissions. I'd like to, if there's someone else who wanted to say something. Okay, I'll ask Susie to go first and then Jeff again.
Well, I suppose I'm probably just amplifying what we're all thinking about and what we've just heard about, but what it strikes me very strongly that for me, it's not that new a method, but it's where it is it's newly applied in a higher sphere of influence, because this is the kind of dialogues we have at community level all the time. And so what's exciting is seeing it, in this context, rather than that the method is so new to us. I don't think probably is in many ways, we'd recognize a lot of it. And it seems it's a lot about stepping up an atmosphere. You know, it's like a conducive atmosphere and stepping up into taking full responsibility for, you know, your place within this interconnected thing. And it struck me a little bit as to the redistribution of, you know, hierarchical power systems to more flat distributed networks of power, which Holgram in Permaculture has written about as an ecosystem response to depletions of energy, you know, that we're ecologically adapting. So it's almost like it's a tracking thing to make sense of a change that has to happen anyway. And this is like a new sign of it happening, which I find very exciting. So that's just my own reaction to it.
Thanks so much. I think Seb was having problems hearing. Is that still the case? You can't hear?
I think I fixed it for now. I'm really sorry. I really apologize. I don't know why I cannot hear.
No worries. I think
I didn't have a question anyway. So, I mean, it was just reflecting on the fact that it's a ground up approach showing up at a top level area. And that was exciting. And that it seems to be an indicator of the distributed network response to the ecosystem challenge in our human society of reduction of energy, which is something Holgram spoke about. But I suppose the other little piece is that it does, you know, my other response is, right, okay, how do I, you know, use this as a catalyst in Ireland to have more dialogues at that higher up level, you know, because that it's like we've been having this kind of dialogue in community level for a very long time. So it feels like when a top level organization recognizes something, it gives us more agency in our national governments to kind of go, right, let's see if we can host it to go, you know, I'm sure Iva's probably thinking the same thing. It's like, okay, can we have one of these quick? You know, because there's a nice catalyst there to support us doing it.
Were you able to hear that, Seb? No, I'm so sorry.
We can send you the recording because it is interesting. Can you hear now, Seb? You can hear now.
Okay, well, we'll try. Otherwise, I just, if people could type up as they speak, if that's, so that if in case he can't hear, he can also read what you're saying and respond to that. But I understand that Susie's was mostly a reflection, so not a question. Okay,
maybe just to Susie briefly, I think one thing that you could try is always to highlight to the governments at your level that there is this Talanoa Dialogue. The deadline for input to the Talanoa Dialogue is end of October. And there is an invitation to organize national events. So they should organize another way of communicating with you and others in Ireland. And I think the fact that there is this limited time window might give you a bit more leverage to try to call for this type of discussions.
Thank you so much. Jeff, I wanted to bring you in. You wanted to...
Yeah, Seb, can you hear me or not? Okay, well, good. Yeah, thank you, Susie. I wanted to touch briefly on what you said as well, because we probably are all involved in some way or other in dialogue processes that build trust and understanding. I've used scenario planning a lot in that sense, but in scenario planning, in a way, you kind of avoid conflict resolution because you give different groups chances to explore different scenarios. And I'm just wondering how, for instance, if our different communities or associations, regions engage in the Talanoa Dialogue process, specifically to climate change, and we come up with different ways of where do we want to go and how do we get there? How are these things resolved into some kind of, is it simply just a way of getting a lot of different opinions? How do you handle conflict resolution? You know, the needs of the say industrialized countries to the needs of the less industrialized countries.
Did you hear that, Seb?
I have no idea what's happening.
Okay, sorry.
It's also very appalling because we're supposed to speak about inclusive dialogue and I can only talk and not hear you back. It's extremely frustrating, so sorry.
Okay, well, I guess the best thing is to send in the recording eventually, and maybe he can respond to us. I can type a quick summary. How do you handle conflict resolution?
Yvette, did you want to come in? Because I hear, like, yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, about the conflict resolution, that's the main question. I don't know why the sound keeps coming and going. So one thing that the Fijians have highlighted since the beginning is because they want to avoid this shaming and blaming and finger pointing that actually governmental diplomats are so good at. They will shut out of a conversation any input that's purely focused on denouncing something for the sake of denouncing. So it does limit the discussion a little bit, and I know that some civil society input have been excluded because they're only focused on what others should be doing and haven't done enough. So that's the limit of this process, and that's clearly one of the limits in terms of how do we try to deal with conflicts within the conversation once you've excluded those purely, let's say, the source of inputs that only focus on this negative dimension. We really will have to see, and I think at the May session, when we see Fijian negotiators facilitate those 18 different dialogues on that one day, we'll have a much better sense of how this is being facilitated. And the interesting thing, and that's quite untypical for the UN, is that the facilitation is going to be purely in the hands of Fijians. Normally they spread this facilitation regionally, and that's because they really want to demonstrate how you do that from a Pacific tradition. So it suggests that those from your groups and other groups that take part to this maybe have a way of sharing this experience afterwards also, because it's an interesting way to really go through this process directly.
Okay. And Yvette will be there from Jen. So Yvette, you wanted to come in, so please go ahead.
Yeah, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Seb. This has been really informative and helpful. And then listening to the discussion, I think there's so much here to all learn from. And really, I just wanted to echo, I think it's been said, you know, the dialogue process is happening in communities all around the world. This isn't something that's new to people on this call, but I think what is interesting is in the context of the Talanoa Dialogue in this framework, we have a mix of communities, of civil society, and of policymakers and government representatives. So really, I think something to take away when we're using this as leverage in our own policy work and advocacy is bringing together and bridging the discussions that are already happening between communities and at that level of, you know, policy making. And that could be local government, national government, whatever it might be. But I really think one thing to be mindful of coming out of the dialogue in May is how to really mobilize and use that going forward in our work. And so this is what Jen is kind of planning to think about, to really leverage this one day, this experience of sitting around a table. There's a very honest, open, frank sharing. Like Seb was saying, no finger pointing, no shaming, no blaming, but a really just open exchange with a handful of civil society, and then I think about 30 members of governments and representatives. So I'm sorry not to be able to see your faces, but I hope, Mira, you can send my contact details around, because I would love to engage more with this group and see how we can work together to build out of the experience in May. And I'm sorry, I have to rush off now, but thank you so much. It has been really lovely to listen to the conversation today.
Thank you, Yvette, and we look forward to hearing your experiences from the May session and the dialogue. It would be great to have, if you could share what it was like for you and what you take out of the process. So thank you for being here, and we'll share the contact details of everybody on the call. Okay,
thank
Nanat?
you.
Okay, hi. Nanat, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you. So in response to Jeff's concerns about conflict resolution, in my experience, what happens during respectful dialogue, and we all have some experiences with that, is that people tend to focus on common ground, not on differences. So I think this type of dialogue can bring this natural pattern forward when people actually try to do it in a respectful way, with a lot of listening and focusing on what's being shared. So I'm not concerned about conflict resolution in this context, and I'm really curious what will come up as a common ground.
Thank you. Any other questions, reflections, thoughts? Because I see that we're also coming to the end of our hour, and I know everyone's really busy. So, yes, Anna, go ahead, please.
Hello? Okay. So I just want to share is that we are also here in Portugal. We are promoting this kind of scenario workshops with communities and at local level, municipalities. And we use some sort of the same kind of methods. We make roundtables, and we share with lots of stakeholders, landlords, government, policymakers. So we try to share the community to talk about climate change. We are not answering this. We are answering these questions, but we not begin with where we are. We begin with where we will be in the future if we do this the pathway that we are business as usual. And I have some kind of work already written, and I'm asking if I can put as an input for the Talanoa Dialogue, because we already have the adaptation pathways to the future. It's a very positive way of looking to the future, because we are adapting these plans for the future. So I'm asking if we can share with you these inputs, or if we have to have the Talanoa Dialogues to share the inputs.
Seb, you want to answer that?
Yeah, maybe very briefly. So I think first this sort of pathway also answers for where we are. It's not just in terms of today, but where we are in terms of pathway. And you really don't need to organize an event to feed into the process. It's more, if you do organize an event, it's important to feed into the formal process afterwards, but you can feed without organizing something additional. What I would recommend for anyone already having resources that they might want to share is maybe to try to avoid uploading longer reports or documents on the webpage, because there'll be hundreds of inputs, and try to have a 2 to 4 page document that summarizes it, reframe it in the context of those 3 questions, and really link, then highlight that this is the summary of your report and provide the link. Because there will be so many inputs, I feel then you get a much better chance of having people go through it, and be very clear about the sort of 2 or 3 actionable points you want people to take from it. But otherwise, you can feed in what you already have if you feel that can help.
Any other thoughts before we close the meeting? Iva, I was wondering if you wanted to just quickly repeat some of the messaging that we wanted to share as tweets on the 23rd.
Yeah, I don't have it right in front of me, but I suppose just to say that, I mean, this seems that this Talanoa Dialogue is, it's absolutely made for ECOLISE. because like if one of the premise is not blaming and shaming others, but focusing on what you are doing and offering positive solutions. I mean, I think every member of ECOLISE, that's where the position that we're coming from. So it's great. And then with regard to the sorry, I'm just trying to find it here. Oh dear. I can't actually find the tweets, but just to remind everybody, so that I'm going to be tweeting, Mira's going to be tweeting on Monday at the EESC organized event in Brussels. And so if you are on Twitter, it would be great if you could retweet what we are tweeting. And I think everybody will have received the email that has the draft proposed tweets in it from me. Well, it came in Mira's name last week. So I'd encourage you all to do that. And also just take this opportunity that if you are on Facebook, I would encourage you to, if you're not already, to join follow the ECOLISE page, and also to join the ECOLISE community group on Facebook, because that is where we'll be posting things more specific to ECOLISE members. So I think that's all. So Mira, I'll hand back to you.
Great, thank you so much, Iva. So yeah, I would, if there are no further reflections from the group, I had actually wanted to give the floor again to Seb for any kind of last comments he might have, and also thank him for being here and giving us this wonderful presentation that we will share with you all, and really encouraging all of us to think through how we can engage with this process, because like Iva said, it's really seems like it's made for the ECOLISE network. So Seb, please go ahead.
Maybe just two very short points, and I totally agree with that final comment. What the Fijian have highlighted is that what's important is not, it's the journey, not the destination, but really we have to focus a lot on this additional ability to dialogue with these authors, and totally recognizing the fact that, of course, eco-villages and so on are based on a very participatory approach, but what this opportunity allows us is also to link up to higher level. And for instance, it's a good opportunity to tell the story of how eco-villages and community-based action help climate action. But one point that could be made at the end is also how these actions can be used by governments to increase their ambition, relying on more actions at the grassroots. So that's the sort of message that can help link back the existing experience to these very important questions of the responsibility of national governments, and trying to establish new channels for these dialogues that are often very complicated between grassroots networks and the national governments. Thanks a lot for having me today, and I'll be available for follow-up questions or anything. I'll type my email address again in the chat. And again, apologies to all for the sound issues, and particularly to Jeff.
Thank you so much, Seb. It was great to have you, and I hope we can continue this conversation in some form or the other, but we'll definitely do circulate an email with the video link and the links that were shared in the chat and with the email addresses, so that we all kind of keep in touch and keep talking and having this conversation about how we're going to not only make submissions to the process, but how we're going to engage our own communities in this process at a local level. So that would be great. Any last kind of reflections? If not, then I'd like to end the webinar. Everyone okay with that?
Mira, can I just say very quickly?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, yeah, just to highlight that on Monday we're trying to make the connection between what you're engaging with in Brussels on Monday and the European Day of Sustainable Communities in September this year. So the information is in the email, and I've posted in the tweets there in the chat, just by way of example. So thanks again. Thanks, Seb.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and have a good day, everyone. Enjoy the sunshine where you are.